Kia ora and welcome to today's episode of a Nichecast podcast, which is going to be the almost daily Patreon podcast that we are doing for the Blackcaps tour of England. So this episode is basically what we're going to do on Patreon, and we're just putting it out there, so hopefully you can catch a vibe and then you want to hear more of it on Patreon, obviously. So we're just chucking up on the regular podcast feed, and then they'll go back to the Nichecast being and the variety show on the podcast feed. And on our Patreon, we're going to do these almost daily podcasts, which are going to be almost daily when we have a big sporting event or just something fun to dig our teeth into, which is exactly what we have with the Blackcaps over in England. So if you love cricket, if you love the Blackcaps, or if you hate cricket and you hate sport, but you want to be able to spin a yarn or two and want to follow the Blackcaps and just keep up with your mates and the office banter, tune in. It's only $1 a month on Patreon. Patreon is the best way to support us. You can plop out whatever you do want to plop out, but it's only $1 a month, and you're going to get this extra stuff as well as just the good karma. We'll give you a couple XP points and karma boostage. But just putting the good vibes out there, putting some generosity out there and supporting the Nichecast, and we just try and return the favor. So, this podcast will just be on the Patreon afterwards, then we'll get back into the regular programming. Do want to kick this show off, though, Wildcard, because we have been following the Wellington Phoenix and their playoff push. They had a 2-2 draw at Eden Park. Amazing game, entertaining. It was great to see Aucklanders loving their Wellington Phoenix, and generally speaking, New Zealand loving the Wellington Phoenix. It's a bit of a niggly little patch here, as now we're waiting on other results during the week. So to set that Wellington Phoenix situation up, and of course you're going to be writing about it soon. You're writing about it today in the email, on the Monday email. Shout out to our email on Substack. And then you're going to do your full yarn as well. So there'll be plenty of Wellington Phoenix coverage coming up this week. How's it just like poised at the moment?
Delicately poised would definitely be the right phrase to use. It's like because they worked so hard to get their destiny back in their own hands, but then it just goes to show like how slim those margins are even at that point. Because needed to beat Perth to they needed to win out to keep that status, and obviously didn't beat Perth. And as you say, it was an absolutely wild and unhinged game of football, especially at the end there. And missed penalty doesn't help, but a little bit hard to blame the guy who kept them in games so much during the start of the season when their form was quite terrible. And that's quite obviously like the point at which, like, if the Phoenix fail to make the top 6 from here, it's not because they only drew against Perth at home. I mean, if they'd beaten Perth, then yes, they probably would be in prime position to get to that top 6. But like, the fact that they're playing from behind and playing catch up and were left with such slim margins that a draw rather than a win is like something that takes everything completely out of their control. Not entirely out of their control, but mostly out of their control. It's the form at the start of the season, the first half of the season, specifically before Stephen Taylor returned. But like, that's what's cost them. But anyway, there's this it's a season where they've had to play away from home in all but 2 games, and they're still, with 1 week to go in the regular season, still a decent-ish mathematical chance of staying in that top 6 hunt. So that's like enough to be applauded right there. It's already pretty impressive. They're 10 games unbeaten, playing good footy at the moment. It's just like, yeah, they're going to need a couple other results to go their way. And there are some midweek games that will be played before the Phoenix play their final. Their Phoenix's last game is again away to MacArthur. It is on Friday night, 9:05 p.m. So there's some very important games that will be played before that, and some very important games that will be played after that. Which like, yeah, that's the sweatiest part of this whole thing, is having to watch other teams and like try to figure out who to support and whatnot. Like, Phoenix right now is 7th, but Perth with a game in hand can overtake them. So in effect, they're 8th unless Perth drops some points. Also need, I think they could technically still catch Adelaide if Adelaide lose their last game and the Phoenix win their last game. They could catch Brisbane, who have a game in hand as well, but if Brisbane only draw that game in hand and the Phoenix come back into consideration, the goal difference will be close there because Brisbane is slightly up on the Knicks there. So there's, I'm not going to go through all the different games that will matter between now and the end of the season because there's 4 or 5 of them that are all going to be pretty crucial. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of that, a lot of trying to update tables on the fly and as it stands stuff. And would this result be good for the Knicks? Or what happens if this team wins? And that's kind of what we're left with for the last week of the season. But I mean, it's better than not being in contention, isn't it?
Definitely is. It definitely is. So they're in contention. Wait and see. These are the almost daily Blackcaps files, and there's only one place to start here, Wildcard. It is the intra-squad, as you threw up. Bit of a conundrum.
Intra. I looked it up after the last podcast we did. It's intra. Inter means between 2 squads. Intra means within 1 squad.
And this game was held in Southampton, so they've had a nice little period down in Southampton, which is on the southern coast of England. Just a bit west of Brighton, close to Portsmouth, southwest of London, and by the looks of things, it looks like a delightful little cricket ground they've been playing on. Not the worst little preparation situation when you're thinking of it looks like it's pretty sunny there for a couple days. Obviously, cricket grounds in England, the village cricket grounds and all that stuff looks nice. And it's an intra-squad, so competitive juices are flowing, but there's not too much bickering or going over the top with those competitive juices. So I'm sure it was all honky-dory, rosy, delightful. Not overly interesting from my perspective, because as we discussed in our little catch-up just before, I find the tour games to be a bit on my whole job is judging cricket and cutting through cricket. So when I'm trying to do that in a warm-up tour game and players are retiring or players are facing 15 different bowlers or the batting lineup is 15 players long and artificial circumstances are created, it's a bit weird, just a bit silly. And those games are purposeful, but trying to take stuff away from them is not purposeful. And then below that on my cricket intensity rankings is an intra-squad game on the south coast of England in springtime. That just seems like a whole lot of cuteness. So lots of players scored runs, lots of players took wickets. What are your thoughts coming off of that intra-squad game and just where we're at that point?
Well, the most important benefit of playing in Southampton as well is not just the weather seemed to be quite nice for them, sure, but most importantly of all is the Rose Bowl in Southampton is where the Test Championship final is going to be held, isn't it? And the reason they moved it from Lord's is because that's at that ground they have their own sort of hotel facilities on the scene, which just makes it so much easier for having bubble conditions once with 2 foreign teams playing. But because of that, the New Zealand team coming over a lot earlier to play these 2 tests against England beforehand, we get a nice little cheeky extra warm up in the pitch will be a little bit different in a couple weeks time, but pretty handy all the same. Another one of those sneaky little benefits where it seems like the Blackcaps, I don't know if it's good preparation or just convenient the way things have rolled out. I mean, often there's no difference between the two, so it doesn't really matter, but it does seem to be another sneaky little advantage we have over the Indian team who still aren't in England, I don't think at all, and won't be for, I don't know, a few more days. They're out there parading their new, their kit for the thing. I've seen a couple of the fellas showing off their fresh whites for the Test Championship final while we're out there actually playing games in the right conditions to simulate it. So nice, good, the sneaky little benefit. I like that. I like the way that these little things seem to be coming up with very small advantages for the New Zealand team. Very difficult to take anything from an intra-squad game where you've got like guys batting multiple times in the same innings. It seems like they basically just like split this squad in half and were like, well, they did have to call in 3 local, I was going to say local youngsters, but I have no idea how old they are. They might be old veterans, who knows? But a couple, like a trio of locals to fill out the numbers, because obviously a 20-man squad doesn't quite go 11 to 11, even less so when Trent Boult isn't over there yet. So 3 ring-ins to fill it out. Sweet as, that don't know that they did anything other than field, but I'm sure that's a fun experience even still. I guess there's 2 things probably that I took from that game. I don't think bowling, for example, is anything you can consider, because I just don't think bowlers are going to go 100% in that situation, because you're far more likely to get injured as a bowler doing that kind of thing than as a batsman. It's more about preparation. It's more about like just getting some reps in. It's more about just like testing yourself out with the Duke ball, I suppose, as a part of it, and getting more than anything like the mental side of things just nicely aligned. But there were a couple of interesting notes in the batting side. Devon Conway as an opener was definitely one of them. Tom Blundell not as an opener also plays into that. I think the long assumed theory that Devon Conway will be opening the batting in this test series and this test tour is looking more likely than ever. I'm pretty much at like a 98% certainty at this point. And then the other thing that I quite enjoyed was you saw a lot of guys get to like 50 odd and then retire. I liked that Kane Williamson got to 15 and then retired. Like he batted, I don't know, probably faced about 10 overs or something, got himself sneakily through to 15, said, okay, I've got myself a start here. It's obviously understood I'm going to go on and score 100 from this point once I've got myself in, so I might as well just like save the hassle and retire right here and right now. I rated that from Kane Williamson, and that's about all there is to take from a game like that, I think.
Kane Williamson's just cruises through the format. So he's just off in the IPL, scores runs for the 2nd year in a row, pops back into ODI cricket, scores runs. Test cricket, scores runs, doesn't matter where he is. I wonder what his like top score in a tour game is. Like, it's hard to be specific about intra-squad games, but I think he's probably got like the fewest runs in tour games of the New Zealand batsmen. Because he's either not playing, or he's going to retire, as you said, 20 odd, got my iron, everything's all good, I'm going to go hit 1,000 balls in the nets instead. And let's do that. That seems more productive.
To understand your game to that degree where you're like, yep, I've got all I need to, like, I've got all there is to get out of this experience. I'm just going to go put my feet up and then, probably have a sandwich in the club room and then go and, as you say, face 1,000 balls in the nets because you know he's not going to stop playing cricket just because he's not out in the middle there. Like, that's pretty handy. Like, that's on a level beyond elite when you're like you just understand your own game to that extent that you can just like have that level of control and knowledge about what you're doing. It's pretty, well, I mean, it's pretty in keeping with standard Kane Williamson areas, I suppose.
So now the Blackcaps are in London at Lord's, and we're preparing for an England test match. I'm going to chuck it out to you, Wildcard. Last time England were in New Zealand, there were a couple of randoms. A couple of dudes who, had to be deep in the mangroves to really know who these dudes are. Or just have, like, some familiarity with their name. A lot of randoms in their team this time around. James Bracey, who, the best I knew, was an Australian commentator. Like, maybe an Australian cricketer who turned commentator at some point. Well, apparently he's a wicketkeeper for England as well, so shout out to him. Couple other Jerrys who are just randoms, and you've mentioned this England rotation policy kind of idea. New Zealand doesn't have to do it because they don't play enough test cricket. The New Zealand rotation is always in ODIs and T20 cricket, especially the diet of T20 cricket that we have had, that's when you get Tim Southee missing the first 2 games, Kane Williamson missing the whole series, Trent Boult missing the last 3 games, whatever it is. That's where you get the rotation for the Blackcaps. England, obviously a bigger cricketing nation, more numbers, and apparently a bit more power, if you believe in the big 3 of the cricketing world. They're just rotating all their blokes in and out, and I don't think that makes them very good. They do have injuries, so I think Jofra Archer's out injured, and another notable injury might be Ben Stokes. But then you've got an England squad that I just don't think is very threatening. However, you do have James Anderson with the ball. He said he knows Stuart Broad. Yeah, so you got James Anderson, Stuart Broad, and also Mark Wood. Though they are proven test match bowlers, obviously Anderson and Broad far more so than Wood. Joe Root's there, a couple other interesting batsmen, but I'm curious, Wildcard, the threat of England is going to be centered around James Anderson, Stuart Broad with the ball, and that's going to come up against the power, the might, the class of Kane Williamson, Tom Latham, Ross Taylor, BJ Watling. So then it's like a excellence versus excellence battle, which is just going to be fantastic, interesting, engaging to watch. Then you're going to have James Anderson and Stuart Broad. Maybe they're going to be more effectful. They're going to be more damaging than other bowlers have been to maybe a Henry Nicholls, or maybe Kyle Jamieson might not find it so easy to bat when James Anderson is swinging the ball both ways in England, let alone the Devon Conway opening the batting. How do you see that kind of, what thoughts are you having, what ideas, what interests you about the battle that the Kiwi batsmen, you can pick any one or just any matchup, coming up against James Anderson and Stuart Broad, they are the Tim Southee and Trent Boult of England cricket, because get them in England, going to be tough. Like, not many batsmen just cruise to runs in England against James Anderson and Stuart Broad over the last decade. Get them out of England, it's going to be a bit easier. Like, that is awfully similar to Southee and Boult. So how do you see that matchup playing out for the Kiwis, and what interests you there?
Well, I think James Anderson's record outside of England is pretty handy still. I'm not sure. I would have to look it up, but I think in general, you do have it?
I'm getting it.
You're on it. Okay. In general, I would say, that is definitely a feeling you get about the English cricket team. And this squad is clearly a squad of an England team who, this is the first series of the summer. They're playing a full series against India, which is the peak of their home summer in about a month's time. So poor old India got to come over here, over there to England for a Test Championship final, which they'll obviously lose, and then go back to India or whatever they want to do in the meantime, and then come back a month later to play against England in a 5-test series. And yeah, that's clearly the peak that England are building towards, let alone the fact that at the very end of the year, there is an Ashes series. So that's the peak beyond the peak that they're building towards. This is a test series for England that makes it look like they're thinking, well, with this in mind, a lot of test matches coming up, we need to know what our depth looks like. And I think that's pretty clear by the looks of the squad when you've got, no Ben Stokes is injured, no Jofra Archer is injured. But you also don't have, I think, Chris Wokes would probably normally be there. Sam Curran would be close. The obvious ones, I guess, are the two keepers, Bairstow and Butler. Neither of them are playing. There's a couple others, I'm sure, that are on the rotation bandwagon as well. Moeen Ali actually is one who could be quite handy in this series where he'd be playing. So it feels like a vulnerable team, for sure. However, it's still English cricket, and they're pretty strong, especially strong at home, and so they're going to have a couple star players that are going to be probably I don't know. It's almost like an early 2000s Blackcaps team, where you've still got someone like Joe Root, you've still got someone like Stuart Broad, like James Anderson, but they're left in a position where they're going to have to do a lot of the bulk of the work for this team to be successful in this series against a pretty strong, consistent, reliable, sustainable Blackcaps team, which is very close to full strength. Trent Boult won't be there for Lords. Touch and go whether he's there for the second test. I suspect maybe it seems like he won't be there for the second test in time, but definitely will be there for the Test Championship final. Other than that, it's pretty much full strength for the Blackcaps, and it is definitely going to be the biggest test for anyone, is like how I suppose those openers in particular, and then Chuck Kane Williamson, Ross Taylor as well, and we'll just go the full top order, how they face that English bowling attack. But I also don't know if it matters a whole amount, because I don't see them scoring a whole heap of runs, to be honest. And if Kyle Jamieson keeps up his home form, which maybe he will, maybe he won't, along with Neil Wagner, who you can obviously rely on, Tim Southey you can obviously rely on. Jamison's never played for the Blackcaps outside of New Zealand, so he's one of those guys who's still got to, it's a new experience for him, so you got to give him some benefit of the doubt, but you also got to have a bit of an asterisk there. And then whoever else fills out the numbers, be it Matt Henry, whose test record is absolutely terrible, but who has had very good results in county stuff in England over the years. Could be Jacob Duffy coming on the scene with a point to prove. He did very well in 2020 debut, so who knows if he'd get a test debut, what it'd look like there. I mean, Colin de Gronholm is an option, perhaps, if you just slide Jamieson in there, or maybe Santner, or like guys who have played, for example, those two were both big figures in the last World Cup, so they've played in English conditions a little bit before. It's different in different formats, but it's still something, like they've experienced this type of tour. I think that England batting lineup outside of Joe Root is going to struggle against a fully firing Blackcaps team. I'm not going to say super confident, because again, I think maybe it's going to be one of those series where runs aren't as. It's also like the other thing to remember. First, we're a month or so into the county season, so it's not the very start of the English cricketing season, but it's the start of the Test season. So there's perhaps not going to be ideal batting conditions quite yet. We know in New Zealand for sure it takes until the new year before the runs seriously start flowing. Generally. I see it being certainly a difficult task that you point out for the Kiwi top order to do what they do against decent English bowling attack. I just don't know if that's going to be the decisive aspect of the series. I think England's batting lineup is definitely there for the taking if we can deliver at a level of expectations that we have for this team when they play it in home conditions, at least.
James Anderson, home bowling average of 23, 24 rounding it up, and away bowling average 31, 32 rounding it up. In New Zealand, 32. So those are pretty much the same. His home and away splits are pretty much the same as his England-New Zealand splits as well. So he's his career, you can basically split it in half. There's a lot of 40s, 30s, 70, 33, 29, 31 averages in his first half of the career. That all flips around and becomes 22s, 23s, 17, 12 in the latter stage of his career. So, I'm not sure what debut in 2003.
His career's been nuts, eh? Like the longevity he's had as a fast bowler.
These Southey and Boult have got better, especially Southey. Southey can move the ball both ways now with that right arm delivery that goes into the right-handed batsman as well as his natural outswing. It's like there's that wrinkle of we're seeing the longevity that applies to a lot of other sports. Chuck up whoever you want, like Tom Brady. LeBron James is still the best player in the NBA at whatever age he's at. Cameron Smith just retired. He was mid-30s. You got Benji Marshall. Every sport has, that Castro dude who was playing for the Phoenix, what was he, 39 years old?
Diego Castro for Perth, 30, 38 or something like that. He's still the most dangerous player on the field every time the Phoenix play Perth.
Yeah, fuck that guy. He was
He's a stone cold Phoenix Slayer, that man. He's every single time.
So yeah, all these old dudes are they're not only excelling at their sport at a later age, but they are like they're finding a new wrinkle to their game that helps them excel. So the easiest example is these seam bowlers who they are developing skills as they get older to counteract the fact that they are getting older. And it's not like the easy example is you've got a dude who bowls 145 k's an hour, maybe 150-ish for a couple years there, gets injured, turns into Sean Pollock. That's really easy. Like you can see, okay, he's getting older, his body's breaking down, he's going to bowl slower, but he's going to be accurate and still be effective. Southey and Anderson especially, like they just do the same thing they've always done, but they've got more tricks, they've got more in their quiver to help them move forward. And obviously it helps with all the recovery stuff that they can stay physically healthy. But it does feel like they're adding things to their game that is helping them get older. Because we also have to think, this is what I think about with like Jesse Bromwich or Jared White-Hargraves. They're playing in the NRL and they've played over 10 seasons. And in that time, the NRL has transformed from one type of rugby league to another type of rugby league. Same in the NBA with LeBron James. Like when he started, they were playing a completely different type of basketball than they are now, but they're still the best. And they've like throughout that period, they've just stuck solid, stayed consistent, and adapted to the game. That also applies to Southey and Bolt. You got T20 cricket, you got juggling formats, juggling skills, juggling weapons, and circumstance and all that stuff, let alone adding and applying that to your test cricket game. It's all pretty crazy, and they're awfully similar.
Yeah, what did you say those home and away splits were, the averages for James Anderson again?
Home and away is 24 and 32. England and New Zealand is 24 and 33.
So 24 basically in English conditions, 32 rounded up for away from home. Tim Southey's in New Zealand is 26.89, Trent Bolt's is 25.35. Away from New Zealand, Southey's is 31.74 and Bolt's is 31.76, which, first of all, just like insanely similar, like to be 0.02 apart in their away records. But also pretty similar to James Anderson's as well. A little bit higher on the home numbers because I guess, I don't know, they just are. James Anderson is, to be honest, an all-time great that's been around a few extra years as well, so fair play to him. But like Southey and Bolt, the numbers and the differentials are pretty similar to what James Anderson has done, which is interesting in light of all that you were just saying, that they seem to be, especially Southey. I think Southey seems like someone who definitely will be watching James Anderson highlights and maybe chatting to him now and then when he gets an opportunity and comparing some notes. I think just because of the way they both bowl is kind of like guys who have given up the idea that they can be like 145 odd like pace bowlers relatively early in their career, probably gave up that idea too. And both being right-handers, both being just a little bit skitty, both being extremely skilled at how they use the ball and how they, like both clearly like extremely talented swing bowlers, is definitely a parallel to be had there. But Trent Bolt also pushing similar numbers. Neil Wagner's, by the way, his home average is 25.98, his away average is 27.08, which is crazy because, like, we've just seen the example, or just heard the example there of James Anderson's record. Suffice to say, like, I just wrote an article on this, where I'm getting this info from. Like, I just wrote an article on the home and away splits for the Blackcaps, seeing as this is a big away tour and they haven't had a lot of those in recent times. Very well proven in home conditions, maybe not as much away from home. So I was just looking at some of those averages, some of those records. Like, suffice to say, it is an expectation that you will score more runs, take more wickets in home conditions. Like, it's not a case of this player is a fraud because their average is way higher at home. Like, you're supposed to score more runs in better conditions. It's like more familiar situations, more just more favorable situations in general. Same as you're meant to score more runs against weaker teams. This is how it works. Like, your average, a batting average of 50 odd, like Kane Williamson has, it doesn't mean that he scores exactly 50 every innings regardless of opposition. It means that he averages out at 50. And that to get to like an average out of 50, you often need to be scoring like 200 not out against, a touring Sri Lanka team or something like that, or the West Indies. It's not because you're consistently going out there and getting huge scores against Australia or India or England away from home kind of thing. Like, this is perfectly normal. You look at Don Bradman's record, I'm sure it'll say that his average is enormously bigger in more favorable conditions. It's the same for everyone. But the closer they are together, that's when it's still like for Neil Wagner to be averaging under 26 in home conditions is obviously outstanding. For his away record to be as close to that as it is from, 18 test matches, 69 wickets, it's not a small sample size, is also crazy, especially because he's a guy who, like, although maybe it's because Neil Wagner is just a guy who, like, the situation doesn't matter that much. He's not necessarily someone who needs a bit of juice in the wicket to do what he does. His game is a mental game. His is like, psychological warfare against a batsman, not so much about like the conditions of the pitch. And it's interesting because the batting equivalent is obviously BJ Watling, who, BJ Watling, where are we? 1,892 runs at 39.41 in New Zealand, 1,881 runs at 36.88 outside of New Zealand. That's extremely similar. Like, that's by far the closest any player has in the Blackcaps who's like a recognized batsman. I mean, the bowlers, because they don't score a lot of runs, are all around those sort of low differential marks anyway. Kane Williamson's, for reference, averages 65 at home and 45.57 away, so that's still pretty huge. It's a huge disparity, but it's also like, those are huge numbers in general, so it's not like he's bad at it. He's amazing in either condition, basically. It's just at home you get to cash in a little bit more. So that just fits in a similar way to what I was saying about Neil Wagner's sort of, it fits the mold of what we expect of him as a player. It also fits the mold there that it would be BJ Watling in that situation, because as we know of BJ Watling, the tougher the situation is for him, like the harder the circumstances of his innings, the better he tends to do. Like, he thrives in the more difficult situations. That's just how he does.
Some of the English batsmen, just get acquainted here. Joe Root, Rory Burns, Zach Crawley, Hasib Hamid is a opening batsman in the squad as well. Ollie Pope, Dom Sibley. And just checking some of the form here. Rory Burns has scored a 50 in each of his last 5 games. His last game he scored a 50 and 100. So he's in form. Shout out to him. Zach Crawley, 2 50s in his last 5 games. Dom Sibley, who didn't look that great in New Zealand, I must admit. Rory Burns is the left-hander who's got the bat coming from everywhere, shits all over the show at the top of the order, but he's scoring runs. Dom Sibley's got a century in his last 5 games and a couple not outs. Hasim Hamed, double centuries in 1 game, 90 odd. So these dudes are in form. They're in form in local conditions as well. So it's the same. We're coming up against what other teams come up when there's like, come to New Zealand and face Devon Conway, who hasn't played international cricket anywhere else, but in New Zealand he is just churning out runs for fun. And you have to not only come to New Zealand where you don't usually play, you've also got to face someone who is scoring lots of runs in those conditions, or Kyle Jamieson with the ball, or Daryl Mitchell. Like, he's just like, all these dudes just carry their form from domestic cricket into international cricket because they're playing in New Zealand. The same is going to apply for Dom Sibley or Rory Burns, those type of dudes. we'll finish with this here. So it's definitely a matchup between the New Zealand bowlers and the English batsmen for you. That's where it's going to be most interesting.
I think for sure that is where our best opportunity of just like, for lack of a better word, for dominance comes from. I think that's the area we can most target. For sure. I just don't think that English batting lineup is as tested, and especially like I think Ben Stokes is such a big miss for them, because to have someone like him coming in at sort of like 5 or 6, and you just know he's like borderline I was going to say borderline your most reliable player. I don't think we can say that anymore because Joe Root's been in absolutely sizzlingly intense form for the last 12 months, but definitely like Ben Stokes is the next most reliable guy, and for an all-rounder, like that just shows the impact he can have. Him not being there, I think, leaves a big hole in their middle order. So if you can nick out a couple of these guys who might be in form at the top of the order, but they're in form in county cricket, it's not necessarily the same coming up again. Like there's no Neil Wagner in county cricket, so I do think I think that's the area we can most target.
Well, Sam Billings is in the squad, and he's only played one game of county cricket leading up to this. I've also got Dan Lawrence here. He's got a century, a 90, and a 55 in his last 5 games. So basically, all these dudes have scored county championship runs in the weeks prior to this test series. So I think in summary, we're going to find out the truth about county cricket.
Here we go.
Like, if these dudes come out and shit the bed against New Zealand, then county cricket sucks. Like, all these dudes just dominated county cricket, scored runs, and if you're playing in, I think the county structures actually changed, and they did it more by pools and stuff like that, which...
Yeah, it has done.
So maybe you're not necessarily facing the best bowling attacks as well, because that was the thing about the Div 1, Div 2. You didn't get many Div 2 county cricketers who would be part of England. England kind of consisted of the Div 1 dudes. So there was always that argument, especially when Kiwis would go over county cricket and they'll be playing in Div 2. And some of Matt Henry's work, for example, was done in Div 2 when, he dominates county cricket. So I'm just talking around a little narrative to keep an eye on here with this test series against England. We got to spice up this series against England, considering that the World Test Championship final has more than enough spice sprinkled on it. We're going to find out about county cricket here, Wildcat. What's the deal? Like, how good is it right now in 2021? If your batsmen are scoring runs in county cricket, but they come up against the Blackcaps, sans Trent Boult, and they get rolled, county cricket sucks. In England as well, in your home conditions where everything's aligned for you to score runs.
Yeah, I mean, county cricket, you're on notice, mate. I also think the other thing about the English batting lineup is it's not just the players that they've got, because, there's a lot of good players playing county cricket, despite whether or not the overall standard of it sucks, as we're about to find out. But, picking a squad is also about picking combinations and things like that. And they seem to be a team that's mixed and matched a lot with their top order, and they don't necessarily know their best 11. They don't necessarily know how things would... this also comes into the rotational policy, is whether they need to know a best 11 or whatever. But they've done some mixing and matching, and since Alistair Cook left, I think maybe that's left a bit of a vulnerability up top. Like Rory Burns has played 23 test matches. He averages a shade over 30, and he seems like he's the one consistent guy. And Sibley, from what I remember, is very much in the sort of, he's a right-hander, but he's in the sort of Mark Richardson mold of opener, the Jeffrey Boycott mold of opener, who's just going to face a lot of deliveries and not score a heap of runs. And when you don't convert those into bigger scores, you then look a bit dodgy. I think that Hamid dude, from what I've seen, that Hamid dude sounds like he might have one of the better records of all of them. I don't think he was actually in the squad to begin with. Pretty sure he was one of the ones called up because they had Ben Folkes, is the fella, isn't he? Who's pretty average batsman, but an extremely good wicketkeeper. Like I think he has the reputation of being like the best gloveman in English cricket right now. And we saw him; he was playing in the series in India, so he got a bit of Test cricket there. He was supposed to be the wicketkeeper here, and Bracey was just in the squad as like I think he was cover for as an opening batsman. But now Folks got injured. Bracey has to step up and be the wicketkeeper, which means that they also had to call up a backup wicketkeeper and a backup opening batsman because Bracey was there to cover two different positions, and they felt they needed to call up extras, which I think takes them to like a 16-man squad or something like that for a relatively meaningless 2-test series, which is strange. Also playing into that whole idea that maybe they don't really, or either they're like just testing out options and want to get a look at as many players in this environment as possible, or they just like, I guess two things can be true, and also they just don't really know their best combinations and which players they would be taken to an Ashes series if it were to be starting next week. The funniest thing about Ben Foakes getting injured, though, is did you hear how he got injured? He was playing a county game, and he was in the dressing room, and he slipped on his own discarded sock and like tore his hamstring or something like that. So, good lesson to all the children out there to always clean up after yourself.
One more bonus here is that because you're playing England, you get the Test match special broadcast as well.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
We'll be able to bounce off what they say, whatever jibber jabber they want to say about New Zealand and just their perspective on the Blackcaps dismantling of English cricket, from the English cricket team to county cricket as well.
I can tell you right now that anything Phil Tufnell says is not going to be correct, and anything Michael Vaughan says is not quite at the same level of incorrect, but getting close to it as well.
So there's like, because we both kind of like Test match special, but you're saying you don't, so you're putting some bad stuff out there right now.
Well, yeah, but this is only two. I mean, I'll certainly listen to
Bumble
for sure. Bumble is definitely someone you gotta respect. Old mate who runs the show for sure. I'm blanking on his name right now, but and also I wonder if they'll be one of them like. Obviously, these guys aren't going to be touring with the team, I would imagine, right now. But normally you'd get guys like a Brian Waddle or a Jeremy Coney might pop up in commentary if they were, if there was a full team touring. On the media side of things, I suspect it's not too hard to get those kind of guys in on a Zoom call, though, for a podcasting environment. There's plenty of talent on an odd Test match special. Just Phil Tufnell in particular reminds me of someone who he reminds me of the wrong type of pundit, which is what you get in English football a lot, where it's like the ex-pro who is always joking about how many beers they can sink and what a good time they had while they were playing, but then also is real critical about how players these days don't take it as seriously as the old ones, and those kind of cliches of
like Blocker Roach.
Exactly like Block. Oh, the NRL is stocked with them. A little bit better with some of the younger guys. Like, I think Cooper Cronk's really good. His voice isn't great for telly, but his analysis is very good. Definitely Blocker Roach and his generation of NRL punditry absolutely falls in that category.
I was watching a New South Wales Cup game, and Mark Carroll, Spud apparently, he was talking, and whenever he would say something, it was like a comedy bit. So there'll be
yeah, right,
like Matt Russell or whoever it was, he was doing the play-by-play, and then Spud would pop up and he'd say, "These new rules," like he'd present it like it was an actual bit that he had been crafting in his head for the last like couple of minutes. It wasn't like, "Yeah, I'm really enjoying how this is happening." It's like, I was just thinking about, and I was like, bruh, it's not even like funny for starters, and then it's all that old school shit as well. But yeah, shout out to them for whatever.
Shout out to Blocker Roach for just saying, "Oh geez," about 40 times every game. "Oh gee, I think Roger Tuivasa-Sheck's having a good game."
Well, that's the worst thing, is that he does a lot of Warriors games, and
he does a lot of Warriors games actually.
if there's one thing worse than Blocker Roach refereeing an NRL game, is Blocker Roach commentating. Sorry, it's Blocker Roach commentating a Warriors game, which he's done nearly every week this season. So glory to the Warriors.
But yeah, cricket should be a little bit better on that. Well, for the most part. I mean, Jeffrey Boycott's retired now, hasn't he? So I haven't listened to Test Match Special for a while because they haven't had that much interesting on for a while. I tend mostly, like during the World Cup, I was listening to it all the time, and since the World Cup, less so. Maybe that has something to do with it. I think maybe that's a part of maybe the way that World Cup ended sort of was a point. But definitely, yeah, that's a nice compendium once you've finished listening to the Patreon only almost daily Blackcaps specials that we're serving up. Little bit of a Test Match special chaser. It doesn't go astray.
We'll try to do the next one after the first day or second day, whatever.
Yeah, so Thursday or Friday or
whatever,
one of the above.
Whichever comes first, we'll do it then.
Whichever one we're awake for.
And then there'll be another episode of the Niche Cast around that time as well, one would imagine. So stay tuned. If you do like this type of Blackcaps yarn, where we're mixing in and out of other references, a couple different topics touched there, interwoven with the Blackcaps, jump on Patreon, links everywhere, and support us on Patreon. It's only $1 a month, and you're not only supporting us, but you get our Blackcaps yarns for the time being as well. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cheer.